And we are back and ready for our next webinar. Our second webinar of the day is about video games as cultural objects and catalysts for social change. Now, I am the one who's going to be giving this webinar. And I guess I'll just introduce myself as I go. Let's go straight into the presentation. Okay, so once again, thank you so much for being here today. For me, it's a true privilege to be part of Ars Electronica. Thank you to the Cultural Heritage Innovation Program, and thank you to the Puerto Rico Science, Technology, and Research Trust, and of course to Ars Electronica for this incredible opportunity. This webinar is titled Playing Culture, Video Games as Cultural Objects and Tools for Social Change. All right, let's get started. First of all, hi. I'm Shirley, and I believe that video games can change the world. I like to think that I'm part of the movement that is making video games more and more relevant worldwide. And part of my job is to take any opportunity I can get to advocate for the power of games and interactive media. My goal with today's presentation is that maybe by the end of it, you will start to think about the value of games beyond their monetary and economical value, which is a completely different conversation I would absolutely love to have as well. But hopefully by the end of this presentation, you will see why I think video games are so underrated and valuable in a social cultural context, or at the very least, understand why I feel so strongly about it. But where does this belief come from? Well, first, I like to think, at least, that I understand the value of video games because, one, I play them, and two, I study them. Even though I've been a gamer my whole life, I've been officially writing and talking about the cultural importance of games since 2015, when I was an exchange student at Aarhus University in Denmark, and Professor Pernille Hermann, this wonderful human being right there to my left in this picture, and who also happens to be the expert in Old Norse memory studies, she encouraged me to research the representation of Valkyries in video games as part of an independent course on cultural memory. I had the absolutely immense privilege of taking as part of my semester with her. This drove me to decide that I wanted to write my master thesis about video games, which was a first for the Viking and Medieval Norse Studies program at the University of Iceland, where I was studying at the time. And I think, don't quote me on this because I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was also for the faculty. Writing this thesis and the subsequent opportunities to present my findings in different international forums within medieval and Norse studies, which is, I guess, the title that I got. I mean, I am, in fact, a medievalist. Being in this environment really gave me the opportunity to talk to people who know exactly zero things about video games and who mostly have a very bad perception of gaming. Academics and scholars in the humanities mostly. Of course, I feel like the sentiment has changed a lot in the last 6 years, but I remember very clearly a colleague telling me right after this presentation about the representation of Norse myth, remediation and adaptation in video games, that a very eminent scholar and professor of Old Norse history, who shall remain nameless, commented that my presentation was, and I quote, very interesting. I, of course, was really excited to hear that, except that my colleague continued to tell me that the professor had found it very interesting, not very useful, uh, but interesting. And I get it. I got it back then, just as I get it now. It is difficult for people who have a very shallow understanding of video games or games in general to see how their study and production can be useful in an academic sense, but also in a practical way outside of entertainment. What I find interesting about this is how some academic department heads kind of see it, and they will kind of like let you indulge in a pursuit of academic, academic research in games, but they don't necessarily want to open that can of worms themselves. You see, video games are very, very complex pieces of media. They seem very simple on the surface, but they are actually incredibly complex. Video games have a lot of moving parts, and those AAA blockbuster games like Assassin's Creed or God of War or Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild have hundreds of people working on them for a long period of time. I mean, you need a lot of very skilled individuals to come together and work on specific aspects of a video game, from programmers to create the game system architecture, to artists who make the conceptual art and the final assets that will be used in the game. But there are also the quality assurance team, making sure that the game is up to par, the producers, managers, and marketing team pushing the game to be consumed. I mean, producing a video game is hard, man. And it takes a long time and a lot of upfront resources, which makes it very difficult for smaller studios to get funded, to get the funding they need. But that's a different conversation altogether. My point is that by not recognizing the intrinsic value of games or video games, we are missing out on a big opportunity for academic and game makers to collaborate and create experiences that provide the players, users, or even consumers with intangible value you can only gain from moving through an experience rather than just by witnessing it. And this is a true challenge because you have the scholars who will listen what you have to say, but because they don't play games and probably have only heard of Roblox, Minecraft, and Fortnite from their kids, will be very dismissive of the idea. There's also the fact that they don't really get it or are simply not interested in getting it. Then you have investors and stakeholders who you could try to convince to finance your multidisciplinary idea and project for a proof of concept. But like I mentioned before, games have super high upfront costs, mostly because you need people with very specific skill sets, and the global demand makes their services more and more expensive. This in itself is a problem because it means that large studios continue to push the same type of games. The only ones they know, the ones they know that they will sell well, while true innovation in the space comes from indie studios who really struggle to get their games financed. And finally, you have the game devs who got on game development because they have this game in their heads that they really want to make and not necessarily have the time or desire to participate in research and development of new game concepts. In my experience, at least, they also usually just think that the humanities and social sciences are boring, which of course is not true for every developer out there. But as someone who's taught at the university level, game design, I find it somewhat alarming too of how resistant most of my students, at least, have been to learning history and reading literature and kind of like all these amazing sources of inspiration. And I guess I'm just very hard-headed. But even looking at how challenging the path is, I actually have doubled down on games and chose to get a second master's degree in comparative literature at my home university, the University of Puerto Rico, so that I could go ahead and later get a PhD in video game studies. Although, well, joke's on me, because there is no such thing as a PhD in video game studies. Well, at least not yet. But that's okay. While completing that second MA, I looked into narratology, media, and gender studies primarily, but I also looked into human-computer interaction, video game design theory, character design, semiotics, representation, and all the absolutely good stuff. This ended up in me writing a paper about one of my favorite games, Undertale, which was awarded Best Graduate Paper that year, and actually will be published this year, hopefully, as part of a collection of essays all written by Puerto Rican academics studying video games. There's also my second MA thesis titled Hidden Bodies, Masculine Minds, the Cross-Dressing Female Warrior in Legend and Video Games. While finishing my MA at the University of Puerto Rico, and later as an adjunct professor at the university in the comparative literature department, I actually organized several lectures, panels, and other activities around video games. They were very successful amongst the students and my younger colleagues, but the administration wasn't nearly as motivated as I was. So I decided to take the activities and my efforts into a more active role. And I decided to start going to entrepreneurial meetups, meeting people, and looking for opportunities to collaborate. I also gained new skills and got my first opportunity to talk to devs, which was about video games. This was at the 2018 Global Game Jam. Up until this point, I had only talked to humanists about video games, never to devs. So needless to say, I was very nervous. I also got the opportunity to be an instructor for a VR summer camp back in 2018, which gave me a lot more than I ever expected. I also volunteered for Story Code Puerto Rico, which is a nonprofit that fosters the use of immersive technologies for storytelling. And we organized the first VR cinema in Puerto Rico as part of that year's Miramar's International Film Festival. And well, now here we are. I am fortunate enough to find myself in a vantage position where I can see the entire forest, not just the trees, at least when it comes to the industry in Puerto Rico, the United States, and Latin America. So yeah, that's pretty much the story of how I got here and the problem I'm addressing, which is a disconnect between academia and games that, in my opinion, should not be there. If anything, academics should be part of video game production, and game developers should be part of research and development efforts in academia so that we can produce games that are more than entertainment or marketing ploys. But today, we are going to go a little bit deeper into this subject. And the thing is that what I argue in general is that video games are an underrated medium with great potential to help humanity grow in fundamental ways and for conveying and engaging with the great diversity of human experiences and cultures in a format that most people can enjoy. It is time that we treat games as what they are, complex cultural objects capable of speaking of the time they were created, capable of teaching soft and hard skills without the learner even noticing they're being taught something, and a medium designed to engage the player in ways no other medium can, enabling us to tell stories that could have never been told before. And you just must be wondering, like, what exactly do I mean? Well, in other words, the unique capabilities of video games as a medium make them the quintessential tool for expression, education, and communication. All right, so I'm just gonna start by addressing the elephant in the room, which is all of the false beliefs around video games. I'm not gonna go too deep into this, but I do feel the need to address it briefly. These false beliefs about games are very pervasive today and mostly professed by people who demonize gaming because of a limited scope or a lack of understanding. First, first off, the idea that games are a waste of time is completely false. There is a lot to gain from playing video games, from new skills to lifelong friendships and even a career. There is even more to gain from creating games, since you need to be extremely creative and exercise lots of critical thinking and logical analysis just to design a prototype. Never mind creating a full-blown game. This is not to say all games are healthy or productive. Video games can be a waste of time, just like any other activity can be, if practiced without any type of control. However, this idea subscribes to a discourse that prioritizes tangible and purposeful production over creativity and exploration for its own sake. This is not to say that terrible things haven't happened because people spend too much time playing games, but I personally think this is more of a symptom of an underlying and pervasive mental state, such as depression. In my experience, playing video games can help escape the sadness that comes with depression. After all, it is true that video games tap into our lizard brain, dopamine-driven motivation / reward system, which is why you can experience flow, or what is called flow, while playing video games and not even notice you just spend like 10 hours trying to get that one item. But depressed individuals should, by all means, seek professional help, as should people who think they are quote unquote addicted to video games. That being said, and my point being that too much time playing games is due a lack of control and time management, or a symptom of something else. It is also true that shutting down video games altogether is very condescending, in my opinion, to adults who are accused of being lazy for playing games, which, mind you, is a very cognitive engaging activity. But it's also unfair to children who want to participate in the world of gaming. Playing video games is an important digital literacy tool for children, since a child who can access their games from a tablet, a PC, and or a console will find familiarity while navigating other types of interfaces, and thus will be able to interact with newer technologies pretty much without issue. Video games can also be an important source of socialization, especially for children who are generally introverted, shy, or have social anxiety. Then there is the idea that playing video games will rot your brain, which is also false. However, I must mention, though, that what is true, like I mentioned earlier, is that video games tap onto our lizard brains and give us all the sweet, sweet dopamine. The effect of overwhelming our reward system, our brain's reward system, is not fully understood. But this is why at one point, I don't know if you guys remember, but headlines have read that video games are more addictive than cocaine or something along those lines. It is also why the APA, or the American Psychiatry Association, has a classification for IGD, or Internet Gaming Disorder. Nonetheless, according to the Addiction Center, this is classified as an, and I quote, unverified potential diagnosis, close quote, which requires further review. In my opinion, the ethics behind using increasingly addictive psychological techniques in some video games is definitely questionable. There are some video games with integrated elements that mimic gambling. This to encourage the player to partake in microtransactions and spend more money in the game. However, I would argue that presuming that all video games are like this is very unfair qualification that completely ignores how some intrinsic qualities of some type of video games make them good exercises for cognitive function, critical and creative thinking. And finally, the idea that video games may be both violent or incite real world violence. This is also not true. What is true is that playing violent games will get the user agitated as they're engaging in the game, especially if they're playing something like Call of Duty or Fortnite. But there's absolutely no evidence that video games makes people take up arms and go shoot other people. This idea became particularly pervasive after the Columbine High School shootings back in, I think it was 1999. In this case, the shooters were known fans of games like Quake and Doom, which were very popular at the time. But that doesn't really mean anything. Saying that this is proof of video games making people violent is like saying that because, I don't know, because people who like cats really enjoy watermelons, then watermelons must be making people really like cats. I mean, if there is, if there are any questions or any comments, I'll be happy to engage with those. But for now, let's just move on and straight into the good stuff. So why are video games so special? I'm just going to start with this quote here, and it reads, in a culture like ours, long accustomed to splitting and dividing all things as a means of control, it is sometimes a bit of a shock to be reminded that, in operational and practical fact, the medium is the message. This is merely to say that the personal and social consequences of any medium, that is, of any extension of ourselves, result from the new scale that is introduced into our affairs by each extension of ourselves or by any new technology. This, of course, is a quote from Marshall McLuhan's The Medium is the Message, which I recommend to anyone interested in this topic. Now, there is a lot to unpack here, but for the sake of time and this presentation, I'm just going to stop and focus on this idea right here, which is any medium is an extension of ourselves, resulting in personal and social consequences. And these depend on the scale or impact these as extension has on our everyday lives, which is my interpretation of what I just read before. McLuhan also continues to say that it is the medium that shapes the controls, the scale and form of human association and action, which relates kind of beautifully to this up here. What this means is that new mediums and technologies allow us to expand ourselves, our consciousness even, and that expansion has consequences. And the magnitude of those consequences depends on how much our daily lives are affected by these new technologies. McLuhan carries on mentioning that machines and automation, but uses electricity, actually, as his primordial example. Electricity, McLuhan argues, is a medium of pure information. It has no message, but rather carries or enables other media and possibilities that in turn free up our time and allow us to extend ourselves to do other things and be present in other places. It is even arguable that mediums encourage and move towards continuous decentralization, not just information, but also of the self. Let's consider TV for a moment. Television is a media technology enabled by electricity, in more ways than just one. Electricity powers the factories that create the parts, that create the components, that once assembled create the TV. Then it is the power of electricity that makes things like the news to be something we can procure without ever leaving our homes. Now, imagine what it was like back in the good old days. I mean, we still have newspaper today, but this is symbolical, yes. So back in the good old days and the times of yore, someone needed to physically carry the news from one place to another. And this, of course, took a really long time and a lot of effort, since the person who was carrying the message had to physically travel to be able to deliver it. And sure, there were letters and stuff, but a human being was still required to move through time and space to deliver or convey any messages. Nowadays, that's no longer necessary. News anchors are extending their presence from recording studios directly to our homes. And as technology keeps getting more sophisticated, we make sure that we are still able to tap into the source of information every step of the way. Actually, being part of a broadcast is kind of like traveling through time and space, if you think about it. Well, actually, that's kind of like what I'm doing right now. Exactly. I am, in a way, traveling through time and space, because I am Puerto Rico. This is being pre-recorded, and you're listening to it tomorrow, which this was recorded yesterday. See, it's confusing, but it's a thing. If you think about it, it's a thing, okay? Anyway, my point is that new mediums and technologies allow us to extend ourselves in many levels. Time, by not having to invest all of our time in satisfying our immediate needs, we can extend ourselves into creative work. By space, by allowing us to be in multiple places at once, extending our voices and ideas to new horizons. Work, the expansion of possibilities makes way to new activities, ideas, and innovations. But what the heck does this have to do with games, you probably are wondering? So what makes video games so special in the context of a medium? Well, video games are quite amazing, actually. How are we extending ourselves through video games? Well, we do it through interaction, narrative, and representation, or at least that's what I would argue. For this presentation, I'm actually only going to talk about interaction, because they will be absolutely too long to do narrative and representation as well. But interaction is the most important one. So unlike other type of audiovisual media, video games are interactive, making a requisite for the content's consumption for the game to be played and therefore interacted with. So if, for example, you're watching a movie and you want to know the entire plot, you just have to watch the thing from beginning to end. With video games, it's not that simple. If a player wants to know the content of a game, they will have to actively go through levels and learn new skills, making the experience a much more involved one than merely watching a film. And sure, watching a film engages the imagination and requires the attention of the viewer, aside from critical thinking, to understand what is going on. Games, however, require physical input. And often this input has a window of action or time limit. Of course, there are other ways in which games are different than other types of media, but I believe that this is the key difference, because it is what gives games their complexity. This gets even more interesting while playing games online. Since while playing video games online, the player transports herself into a virtual space, essentially extending herself into this new reality. Conversely, the player is also in contact with other extensions of other players, also known as their avatars or even personas. These communal virtual spaces, which recently have been referred to as the Metaverse, in the context of online games at least, is the ultimate expression of the human self into a completely artificial reality. Never mind artificial intelligence, you can imagine a pervasive world that is constantly changing according to an algorithm. This is just not, and just not the environment, but the narrative as well. That'd be really cool. Moreover, the inverse might be true as well, since the player is interacting with the system. The collective of individuals who created the game are extended into the player's reality. And the result of this is a co-creation of an experience. I mean, of course, this is just theory. This is just me kind of like going over stuff here. And experimentation will be needed in order to draw up any conclusion. But I would dare to say that by projecting settings and people that once existed, that could be considered an extension of them as well, thus making interactive experiences not just video game, not just video games. They are definitely environments we don't fully understand. So this right here is kind of like the interaction loop that happens when you're playing a video game. So if we start with the left side, there's a decision made by the player. That decision drives an input onto the controller. That input is processed by the computer, which executes a command. That execution of the command shows an output on the display. That display is, that output is taken as feedback by the player, and then a new decision is made. So this loop of interaction is precisely what makes video games so unique. When you're watching a movie, there is no cycle of engagement, right? There's no cycle of interaction. I mean, of course, when you're watching a movie, you can make your own opinion about the content, but the only action that you have available is essentially stop watching the movie. So what makes video games so special as media, right? So Mark J.P. Wolf says that whereas works in traditional media are made up of fixed linear sequences of text, images, or sound, or a combination of them, which remained unchanged when examined multiple times apart from the effects of wear and tear, events, experiences in a video game will vary widely from one playing to another. And this is because you can watch a movie multiple times and it'll be the exact same movie. But when it comes to games, you can play the same video game multiple times and every single playthrough will be different. The action reaction dynamic between the player, the game system, and the rules create infinite possibilities for outcomes, making playing a video game a few degrees closer to a real experience than any other medium. And that's because it is a real experience. Like I said, there is no way that you can play the same game 2 times and it's going to be the exact same experience. It just does not happen. Okay, and the question, okay, so I hope that explanation makes it very clear of why video games are such unique pieces of media and how the medium of video games is truly different to other types of media. Now, when it comes to video games, we tend to think of them as only objects of consumption and entertainment. I, however, would argue that this is not true, at least not for every video game. Because of course, just like not every single piece of written content ever written is literature, not every single video game ever published is worthy of analysis. In my opinion, there are 3 different types of games that are the most interesting ones. And I think that these type of games are the ones that, for me at least, have the biggest appeal as not just cultural objects, but also tools of social transformation. And those are serious games, gamified applications, and what I would call edutainment games. So starting with serious games are games designed with an objective beyond entertainment. So that's games for education, for health, training, and they're usually they're usually simulations. So, and the image that you see on the screen, you have the game is in the center. It's surrounded by some, if these are not all, but definitely some of its functions. So you have the gameplay, the challenges, the tools, the interactions, and the objective. The explicit objective, which is the entertainment aspect of the game. But then serious games add an implicit objective, which is to improve a skill, to get some type of knowledge, get more experience doing something, get some type of physical improvement or recovery. Normal games don't try to have implicit objectives. They don't have to. But serious games try to be sneaky about teaching you stuff. The thing is that playing a video game is learning. You need to learn. There's no way you can play a game, whether it's a video game or a board game, without learning something, because you have to learn the rules, you have to collaborate, if it's a call-up game or a multiplayer game. So necessarily, the player has to learn while they're playing a game. So might as well just learn some new skills or some new knowledge while you're at it. And on this topic, it also blows my mind how a lot of video game fans are really good at learning the entire lore of the fictional world of their favorite games, like World of Warcraft or Halo. I feel like it's outstanding how the lore of many of these fictional worlds really enthrall players. And one of the things that I would love to do is to try to translate that to actual history, because there's people out there who still think history is boring, and I beg to disagree. Okay, so the second type of I don't want to say game, because it's not really a game. This is gamification. Gamification is applied game design elements to activities that are not games. So gamification applications are used as a hook for users to perform tasks that would be otherwise boring or provide low dopamine levels. And they're mostly used in marketing, adult training, and education. So if you're ever taken a course in Coursera, for example, those are completely gamified. The leaderboards, of course, gamification is more than just adding a leaderboard. But it's definitely one of the elements that you see in gamified applications. And gamification is something that is more and more popular, especially now during pandemic times, because, well, it's really hard to be engaged when you're sitting in front of a computer all day. Which is also weird because there's so much to do in the computer. But when you're trying to pay attention in class, it's definitely not something that I would recommend. And the very last one is edutainment games, which are video games whose primary objective is to entertain, but that are designed with an intention to share something meaningful. Games that strive to teach soft skills such as empathy and active communication I would put under this category. The example that I have here is Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. This game was released in 2017 or 16 or 17, if I'm not mistaken. And the game was created by a team of game designers and a team of psychologists, psychiatrists, and people with psychosis, because Senua was the main character of the game, has psychosis. The game is set in during the Dark Ages. She's a Celt warrior who fell in love, and her lover was murdered by Vikings, if my memory doesn't fail me. And she has to travel to the underworld to try to save his soul or find him again. Thing is that you go through the entire game just listening to all the voices inside Senwa's head. And the game was developed with people who actually suffer from schizophrenia. And it's a great tool to empathize with people with this mental illness. I also think that video games have the potential of being able to let us experience things we would not be able to experience otherwise. And this game is a great example of that. There are also games that adapt historical settings, stories, and characters intertwined with fiction. Assassin's Creed is probably the best example of this. I have my reservations about these type of games just because there's a lot of people out there who play these games and might assume that what they see is factual when it's not. Yeah, I don't know. One of the questions that I keep on the back of my mind is how exactly are video games affecting the way that we perceive our past? And I think it'd be really interesting to do a study about that. That might be my PhD topic. Who knows? Well, and just as a conclusion, I think that video games don't just have the potential to keep surprising us as a medium. I don't think we have tapped on the full potential of video games as a medium for storytelling, as a medium for interaction. I think there is so much to go still. And of course, whilst we are getting easier and faster tools to create games, more and more games will get published. Also, video games are already changing the world. There are people out there who are into eSports. Esports, the industry has just blown up. It's forecasted to grow as much as 1.62 billion US dollars in 2024. And the whole streaming thing as well. It's also a $1 billion. The viewers, I'm sorry, the viewers are in the billions. So you have companies like, well, Twitch belongs to Amazon and YouTube belongs to Google. And then you have Facebook, right? And they're all Facebook gaming specifically, and they're all competing for this space. So, you know, you have really big players in the space. You have players finding their niche and their communities, and just making content and being part of a gaming community is also what makes them such incredible objects. It was also worth mentioning that VR, virtual reality, and also oh my God, I forgot the word. Video production. I think it's video production. VR technology would not be where it is today without the video game industry, period. And the truth is that VR and AR will only continue to grow in the next few years. And of course, the most popular application for VR are still video games. And what about the future? There is no doubt in my mind that video games will be a catalyst for crypto adoption due to play to earn and play to win models in crypto games. I will talk a little bit more about this on my next webinar. So stay tuned for that if something you're interested in, as well as my comment on the metaverse, because video games are also a catalyst for the metaverse. I really can't overstate how incredibly amazing, important video games are for us today, right now. The way that this industry is shaping us, shaping our future, is no joke, for real. Just imagine for a moment, you have these kids, these children, teenagers spending a lot of time online. I think personally that it makes perfect sense that if they were able to live most of their lives online, if they were able to work online, if they were able to just keep socializing online, if they were able to make everything they need to do as seamless and frictionless as possible online, they would do it because it's what they know. It's what they love. And maybe for us, it's kind of crazy, or for some people at least, it would sound kind of crazy. But I am quite sure that these kids who have grown up playing Fortnite, Call of Duty, these kids who have grown up going into VR chat, playing MMOs like World of Warcraft, Roblox, Minecraft, those kids are going to live in the Web 3.0. They're going to build the metaverse, and it's going to be based off the games they're playing today. There's also not forget that the video game industry makes so much money. So much money, the type of money that changes lives, and does not just change life, it changes countries. The video game industry is a game changer for those nations, jurisdictions that have seized the opportunity, such as Mexico and Brazil. Just last year, Mexico made $1.9 billion and Brazil $1.75 billion through the video game industry. ¿Qué pasa, Puerto Rico? We should be making video games here. Anyway, thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much for being here. I apologize, this was a little bit longer than I expected. But I really like talking about video games. What can I say? If you have any questions, there will be no Q&A today. So if you have any questions for me, please do reach out to my Twitter, to my email address, or on LinkedIn. I'm absolutely thrilled to answer any questions or have a conversation. Please do reach out. I would like to thank you all for being here today. Thank you for listening to the webinar, and I'm just very thankful. Have a great rest of your day if you're leaving. If not, I will see you in the next webinar in just a few minutes. So thank you so much, and see you soon.